Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great day. I missed you all. So glad to have you back with us on the Inkwell Exchange. If you are new here, the Inkwell Exchange is basically a forum for artists, writers, creatives, particularly those that use ink to talk about and sometimes the business side of it, what they've learned from the publishing industry, how they got published, all of that great stuff. So my guest today is Amanda Ross. I'm so excited to have her on. She's going to tell you all a little bit about herself to kick us off. And then I'm going to dive in because you all know I have questions. So go ahead, Amanda.
Well, hey, how are you doing?
Good.
Thanks for having me. Well, yeah, so I'm Amanda Ross. To anybody who's not familiar with me, I am an indie author. So far, I've written 3 novels and co-published 2 anthologies. I write dark fantasy and horror, and all of my content is just full of Black and queer characters living their best lives and being as magical and badass as possible.
I love that because we're magical and badass in real life, so it seems right. So how did you, first of all, I started off all of our segments with this question because I think this is always the most interesting story. How did you get into writing? Did you stumble into it? And then what kind of writing did you start off with? I think we all have our kind of gateway drug in that sense.
Sure. So I think for me, I came from a household that's full of a love of reading. So my mom is a huge reader. She was reading Anne Rice to me when I was in middle school. We were reading books together and had our own little 2-person book club. I remember debating with my brother about whether Lestat was a villain or not. So that's the fantasy, the horror, the love of reading has been there forever. My dad was also a huge storyteller. Every night before I'd go to bed, he would tell me a custom, like brand new story. And it was a series. There were season finales, there were high stakes, just made up off the dome. And so that instilled a love of both reading and storytelling in me. And I, as a millennial, was definitely that Barbie girl. So I was making up stories for my Barbies at a young age. And that really translated into the creativity of writing. Because once I had the storytelling and once I put pen to paper, and I realized how cathartic it could be for me, that's when I really started thinking this could be my journey in life, because it just felt really good to be able to tell all of the stuff that's in my head and not just have it for my little, Barbie and Ken in the corner, but actually thinking maybe other people could benefit from reading this too.
I love that. So did you start off with full-length, stories? Were you one of those wonderful people that, can write, a 90,000 fan fiction and be amazing at it immediately? Or did you start off with shorter, smaller pieces?
I would say shorter, smaller pieces. Even in high school when I was in English class and we had creative writing time, that was always my favorite. I know a lot of my classmates would groan, but I would just kind of come alive during that time. And then when I was 14, so when I was a freshman in high school, I wrote my first novel. It's never seen the light of day because it's I'm so much better as a writer. But it really helped me to hone that skill of finishing something. I think that when it comes to writing, that's you can have the creativity all you want, but it's the discipline that will help you carry through to actually having a career, and you have to finish something. So that was my first foray into really finishing something.
And I think the next segue is, have you always written fantasy and have your main characters always been Black and brown queer people?
So that's a great question. No, I've not always written fantasy. My first novel was like a contemporary YA drama about somebody's mama who dies and doesn't leave their daughter a fortune. It was a mess. It was a whole lot of me expressing my emotions of my whole life. So, but I've always been a lover of fantasy, and so when I really sat down to think about a novel, it just was a natural fit. And in terms of were my main characters always Black and brown, no. My first novel, the first treatment of my first novel, my main character is actually white, and I when I sat down to rewrite it, I didn't see that character that same way again. I was thinking, why write this character as white when it doesn't feel authentic? It doesn't feel like good representation. We need to see more black and brown witches out in that world. And I was also doing a lot of reading, a lot more reading than I do now at the time, and reading a lot of fantasy books and thinking, wait, I'm not seeing black witches. Like, where are we? Where are we at? So that's kind of what led me to realize that this is where I needed to be in it. And once I made that shift, it just felt correct.
Yeah, no, actually, one of the things I really loved or like attracted me to your work were the fact that you had black and brown people and faces on your covers, which is not, unfortunately, the norm. I've read tons of books that do have black, brown, queer people as the symbol or as the main character, or as the protagonist, and we're nowhere on the cover. We're
Right.
flowers or, you know, an apple or something, but we're not represented. So what made you kind of make that decision? Did you face pushback from
So I didn't face pushback. My first novel, the first two books in my series, don't have anybody on the cover, and it felt appropriate for the subject matter because there's a lot of more mysticism, there's a lot more symbols, and it deals with the elements. So having those covers be more abstract, I think worked with the story. But my most recent novel, In the House of Transcendence, I knew that I wanted to have my main character Zora on the cover for a couple of reasons. First of all, she's a beautiful, unambiguously black woman, and I wanted to highlight that, especially her with her natural hair, having flowers in her hair, her not being a size 0, she's got curves. I really wanted to highlight that because that representation is definitely lacking.
it?
And so I knew that there was a chance that putting her on the cover could mean less sales because at the same time that I was commissioning this cover was around the same time that, you know, there was a bunch of graphic designers that came under fire for saying that they don't do commissions or that they don't create ready to use covers with black characters because nobody's asking for them, which is obviously like a lie, right? But it felt even more important to me amongst all of that to have her be on the cover because I wanted people to know this is what you're getting. And if you don't find her relatable, that's not my problem. If you don't want to read it because she's on the cover, that's also not my problem because the right people will find this book and feel represented and enjoy seeing somebody that looks like them on the cover. And, you know, I gave the book to my mom and she was the smile on her face seeing somebody that looks like her in the cover. It was priceless for sure.
No, I love that. I think there's something to be said. I think we see a lot of times with like paint artists that have the medium of like paint or sculpture have the opportunity like in movies and representations and news stories, right, to stand up for their art and fight for it. But a lot of the times the art in the creative process of writing, people forget that like when you're going through the process of deciding on a cover, when you're getting feedback, whether it be from a publisher or from just the people around you, writers can also face pressure to pull back, cut scenes,
Yeah.
cut things that make people uncomfortable. And I would sometimes even more so than just the visual arts, because we also sometimes dive into icky, sticky emotions that people don't want to deal with. But the other thing I definitely wanted to hit on, because the second part of that genre, that black fantasy, is fantasy. How did you happen into the fantasy? How do you keep and fuel your imagination? Because I think that genre in particular has, I'd say, like a danger of falling into a very formulaic pattern. I'm a huge fantasy romance, all of that reader. And eventually after the first 100, right, you start to see some patterns. And how do you keep yourself fresh and thinking of things differently and not completely falling into kind of the formulaic, I guess, layout of the typical fantasy novel?
For me, I draw inspiration from everywhere. I think it's important to be reading as a writer. I know that some writers will hold off on reading, especially if they're drafting, because they don't want their work to be too influenced. For me, that's when I bust out my audiobooks because, I still consider listening to a book as reading, but I'm not seeing the words on the page, and so it reaches a different part of my brain. And so I think it's keeping myself well read. It's drawing inspiration from everywhere. I mean, I draw inspiration from nonfiction, TV shows, RuPaul's Drag Race, like anything around me can be inspiration. And I think that because I have such a varied interest in so many different genres and so many different types of media, that it really helps me to keep things fresh and not fall into the formula. Because, to date, all of my works have involved witches, and they've all been different. And so, I think that it's just varying the type of media you consume that can help you.
I love that. So I think one of the other things we have people who come to our show to think about are a lot of aspiring writers. And some people are just getting their start, some are kind of amateur in the middle of it. What is some advice that you kind of wish you knew going into writing your first novel that you actually were going to publish?
Well, I would say probably three things. So the first would be to be open to any types of publication experience. Like many authors, when I first finished my book, I thought, okay, great, I'm going to query this, and there is no other route to take. I didn't consider self-publication until a little bit down the road, and I think if I would have been a little bit more open initially, that would have, I think, helped with the transition. I want people to know that if you decide to go the self-publication route, that's not you, you're not less than because you self-publish. You are somebody who's taking your work and really wanting to own the full process and have control of it. And not to say also that that's a better route than trad. It really just depends on what you want. But I think for me, it was really having in mind what it is I wanted out of the publishing process. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's having your definition of success in mind before you publish is so important, because it can be easy to publish and then not know what you count as success and see everybody else succeeding and then get jealous and then down on yourself and be in this spiral. And these are your colleagues, these are potential friends, these are potential connections. And if you're just that jealous, pardon my French, if you're just that jealous hoe, seeing everybody else and you're not being a good potential friend or colleague, then that you can really sour your opportunity. So understand what it is that you want as your success will really help you get far, and keep your eye on your own career. And then I think finally it's speaking to that, those people, get a writing community, become friends with other writers. Even though you were writing by yourself, you actually need people in your life. Writing is not a solitary practice like people want to think it is. You really would benefit from having friends who are authors, from being community with them, because not only will they help spread the word of your book, they're some of your biggest cheerleaders. They can help you identify plot holes. They can help you name your characters. They can help you decide if, hey, you've strangled your characters twice in this book, or maybe go with a different type of death. Like, they can really help you get out of those ruts in a way that maybe your non-writing friends can't. So those would be my pieces of advice.
I really like those last two, mostly because I was talking to a friend at a recent poetry event, and she was talking about, she was very lovely and giving me some wonderful, not like real life flowers, but the metaphorical ones. And she was like, it's so inspiring to see you out there and doing stuff. And I think my immediate reaction was, one, to reject the compliment, but two, because I'm not good at taking them, but two, my immediate response was to be like, one of the reasons why I feel like I'm able to enter different spaces with such confidence is I always feel like I'm winning. Not because I'm actually always doing something, because that is never going to be the case. But if you have a close community, when my community wins, I feel like we're all on top of the world. So if my friend gets booked on a commercial, or she gets her poem featured in a newsletter that she's wanted to, like, that's a win to me for us, right? And so I can cheer for her. And I think that was also like my advice to this friend of mine was like, you don't feel down when you feel like you're always winning, because the people around you are winning, right? And so rather than looking at it in a jealous way or envious way, or even just like a they're doing better than me way, or I'm not doing enough way, look at it as I'm surrounding myself with people. And remember, birds of a feather flock together. So if your friends are doing awesome, guess what? You are too. Exactly. So I love that advice. And I think probably my next question for you, since we're on a social media platform, you have taken to Instagram like a fish in water. You do a great job of talking and posting content that is interesting and engaging and building a community. I think some people forget that that's a large part of being kind of a full-time creator or writer. I've learned that from, I just like talking to authors and listening to them talk. And so, but I realize now that I've run into the world of Instagram, there are so many more that are talking about so many cool things. I know there's this one, I don't remember her name off the top, but she like occasionally tries to turn her husband into like a fictional man and will like get these scenes of like run and try and get him to mimic them. And I consume those every time as soon as they publish, right? And so you have also carved out a great niche for yourself on Instagram, and just like social in general. Talk to our audience a little bit about like, one, if you thought social was going to be that big of a part of your job or a part of your like promotion of your art, and two, like, how do you keep from getting burnt out on it?
Well, that's a great question. So firstly, no, I didn't. I didn't think that this was going to be as big of a part. And it, for people who are new or wanting to be an author, it is a big part. Promotion is huge. Whether you traditionally publish or self-publish, you're still going to have to promote your book. So, I would say start getting in the groove of doing that even before you publish. In terms of avoiding burnout, I think I just had to be real with myself and understand where can I realistically show up consistently. Because I don't think you have to be everywhere all at once. And I think that the more you devote to being consistent with just one app, it's better than being everywhere and not posting consistently on all of the apps. I think you need to go where your audience is, go where your community is, and try to look at other authors for inspiration. Even on TikTok, there are so many authors that I follow that I see them doing something and think, how can I put my own twist on it? And not just authors, but other content creators as well. I think that that's kind of a through line for me, is surround yourself with creative people, follow creative people, and you will always have a wealth of ideas. Because there's so many times where, I'm talking to some of my author friends and I get an idea for a post, or I get an idea for how to talk about my book because they will say something and I'll think, oh yeah, that's right. So that's also why it's important to have, creative people around you and to be following them on social as well.
I agree. And I think one of the things probably I'll tag on and add for our audience is like, share and support your friends. I'm a big one who will like tag my friends on my story. Like if they have something they want me to share, like just ask. Because I think we have created kind of this outlook or like this world of scarcity where it's like, oh, well, I can only like so many people, or I can only follow so many people, or I can only support so many people with a comment. Mm-hmm. And like, that's not really accurate or realistic, right? You can like, if you created a community that is accepting and you have good friends and you believe in their art, there's nothing wrong with, even if I can't make it, I'm going to post the event and be like, hey, anybody who's in the area and has time, please go pull up or check them out. I had a friend who's doing something at 8:30 today in the DFW area, and I immediately posted it on my story and was like, go see them. He does music. And so it was just things like that that I think are other ways for us to support our writing community outside of just like the being a beta buddy, or like, because I'm also one, like, I also have a full-time job, so I can't always sit up and read your article or edit it, or
Right.
even if I wanted to. But what I can do is I can post, I can make a video, I can show that I'm reading your book. What do you want me to do? How can I help? And let me do that. And I think that's also a beautiful part of creating a community. And it's a beautiful part of being a writer, is sometimes our brands just give us that flexibility. So that brings me to my next question, which is, did you like actually have to think about building a brand, or was it more organically formed, right? I'm a PR person by trade, and so I spend a lot of time curating the way that I want things to look. But I think I also sometimes forget how when you're writing, you want your writing somehow to fit into that brand as well, or you think about what you're writing. Have you ever had an instance in particular where you wrote something, you were like, I'm not sure this kind of fits with like what my audience wants to read or whatever, and had to double think it or pull it back or think, maybe not?
Well, that's a great question. So in terms of my brand, I think it took me a lot of trial and error to get to where I'm at. And I say this as somebody who, my day job has typically been like marketing, content writer. I've done a lot of social media for other companies, so maybe that might be why I'm so comfortable with thinking through it. But it took a lot of trial and error for me to get a lot of time in Canva, trying to figure out my colors, all of that. And I still have moments where I want to change because I'm a Gemini and I can be indecisive as fuck. So that's a big part of it. But in terms of what I write, not really. I generally don't write to market. I write what I want to put out in the world, what I think the world needs, what I feel would be good. My most recent novel is heavily inspired by like Charmed and P-Valley and things like that. And the ones who know, the ones who get it. And that's generally how I operate. The novel I'm working on now is inspired by Dante's Inferno and the Ways, with like a lot of other kind of gore in there. And so I just write what I want to write and feel like the audience is gonna come. And I think when you come from a place of authenticity, both with your writing and with your social content, people will pick up on it. They'll be drawn to it, and they'll want to read your work. They want to follow you on social. And I feel like whenever, kind of coming back to your question about burnout, that's also something to remember too. I feel like when you burn out, part of it can be that you're trying to do something else. You're trying to be somebody else that you're not. You're thinking too hard about what you're going to post. You're thinking, oh, I have to be this. I have to be this wealth of knowledge. When sometimes all you really need to do is hop on TikTok or Instagram and say, look, I am tired today, but I wrote. How are you doing? Or, I had this really funny incident where I was talking to my mom about my book, and she told me, you better send it to Jordan Peele, like whatever it is, Sometimes people just want to see that you are authentic, and that can help you, rejuvenate yourself if you feel burned out.
I love that. Well, this is the time I also want to give the spotlight. Tell us about your latest novel. What makes it special? What made you excited about it? And then, of course, please tell us how we can support, where we can follow you, all of that good stuff.
Sure. Well, this idea kind of just popped in my head. The original title was going to be Carriage of the Dead, and that line just kind of popped in my head one day, and I thought, what is this supposed to be? What's happening? I was watching The Wiz. It's one of my favorite movies, and I thought, well, what if this was horror? What if we took some of the elements of this and made it horror? You know, Dante's Inferno has been a huge, huge book that I've been trying to tackle for years. I read some of it and go away because it's, you know. But I thought, what if I took these two things and I put them together? I've been wanting to jump into the horror genre for a while. It's my second favorite genre. I have a horror podcast and book club, so I'm definitely a scream queen in that way. And it just felt like such a natural fit for me to progress into that space. So essentially, this book is called No One's Gonna Take Her Soul Away. It's coming out this winter, and it follows a woman named Saphira who is unalive and sent to hell, and she has to break out of that with the help of a vampire, a werewolf, and a demon. And there's a lot of info about, you know, a lot of themes of about emotional recovery, about trusting yourself, about overcoming abusive relationships, both with yourself and with others. And so that's what this novel is about. I'm really proud of it. I'm almost done with it. The cover's being you know, created right now. It will have another Black woman on the cover. It's set in the 70s, so we're giving a little Donna Summer tease, and it's going to be great. In terms of where you can follow me here on Instagram. I am also pretty active on TikTok with the same handle, Amanda the Author Ross with 2 E's. You can also follow me on Twitter. In terms of support, you can get my books on Amazon, especially in the House of Transcendence, which is my most recent release. If you like dark fantasy and you want to see hot queer witches doing hot queer Black witch things, I highly recommend that book.
I love it. I love it. I know mine is in the mail, so I can't wait. I'm gonna post when I get it. I've been waiting to make that reel where it's like, this is what the book that I'm in the middle of. Whatever. So expect to see that soon. Anyway, and so I'm so excited. I want to thank you so much for coming. This has been the Inkwell Exchange's first dive into fantasy and horror genre, both of which are like very close to my heart. They're my second and third after romance. So I was so glad to get you on, particularly a Black female writing in the genre, because I feel like it's such a small pool, and it warms my heart every time I get to find a new book that has one, a Black female writer, but a Black female writer bringing Black main characters with a Black gaze, and kind of feeling that freedom in the space. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you much for sharing all of your tips. I'm sure these wonderful Inkwellians, as I've decided to dub them, will love it. And also, while we wait on your book, guys, if you haven't read Dante's Inferno, do please try and get your way through it. It is a beautiful work, but it is a hard read.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, all of you Inkwellians, for joining us. I will see you all next time. You have a great rest of your evening.
Bye.
Bye.